Hey, everybody, good morning. Hope everybody is doing very well on this Tuesday morning in Eastern Europe. Just back from London. Had a nice visit this weekend. Saw my old buddy Peter McCormick from the old What Bitcoin Did show. Has a new, uh, more generalized podcast. So I sat for that, which was great. Also, toured Bedford a little bit more. I've been there many times now, actually, but he's becoming the big man on town, um, buying the football team, just bought a second football team in Bedford. They should hopefully about to win the league 3 years in a row and 3 years of promotions, which I guess is only done by a handful of teams in English football history. No one's done it 4 times. So that's what they're going to be going for next year, presuming they win this year, which I think that they will. And yeah, saw a banger. They won 7-1 this weekend. So it was great. It was great to see Peter. It was great to sit for the show. And he's a good guy who cares about improving his town, improving his community. And of course, we met through good old Bitcoin many years ago. So really enjoyed it. I'll let you know when that show comes out. But I was thinking that I would go through a couple charts. I brought about like 40 charts to London, only went through a handful of them just because when you start talking, as I do, I have my tangents. I go on many different tangents and don't always stick to the point of the charts. And of course, I was going to talk a lot about Ukraine. We did talk about peace and the potential for a just peace in Europe. So I want to do a little bit more of that today. I'll continue to talk about that, of course. But there's some interesting developments. So the tragedies, though, still have continued. You see here in the last, looking at this black line here. Let's take the cumulative casualties off. Russian casualties passed 900,000 a little over a week ago, and you see this little dip. When Trump was coming in, Russia was really trying to put the pressure on as Biden was going out. They were averaging 1,600 casualties a day, the 30-day average. This is going back up again, 1,500 or so, 1,800 at points, but the 30-day rate is going up to 1,300 a day. And here you go, 916,000 as estimated by Ukraine. 100,000 have been ID'd. You can find that in in the media. Actually, 100,000 dead Russians ID'd. But typically, the idea is that it's something like 3-1 of casualties to, casualties to fatalities. So people have been saying 300,000, 400,000 dead. Again, it's just a tragedy, human tragedy on all levels, certainly for Ukrainians the most. But among the Blitz piece, we have had some good news. Last night there were no drone hits on Ukraine, as far as I understand, as far as I saw in the news, which was quite rare. Perhaps they're moving on something finally. Again, they just keep losing soldiers for the same amount of territory. Okay, so people thought that Ukraine was going to fall in 3 days here. This was getting close to 30% of their territory coming down from under 10% from the 2014 invasion, almost to 30% in the start of 2022, and then they just kept pushing Russians back amidst all of these nuclear fears, nuclear saber rattling from Russians. Ukraine has a dirty bomb. We're going to use all means necessary. Russian TV said they're going to simulate. Not they didn't say that, they did. They showed simulations of nuclear strikes on the UK and the US in Europe. Exit nuclear test ban treaties. Lots of nuclear saber rattling, always from Russia. Let's see if Trump can actually deliver on at least the ceasefire. He's been pushing hard for it. Cost them 8 soldiers per 112,000 square kilometers of territory. That's what it's cost them to hold this throughout the war. And I say not Ukraine, but Russia. Russia holding the territory in Ukraine that they occupy, not getting any easier for them. And once again, Trump has been saying for months now that the U.S. has provided $300 billion, $400 billion, $500 billion. Certainly Ukraine appreciates all the help that they do get, but it has never been more than European aid. European aid, as of last quarter, and the year-end 2024 was 130 billion euros. The U.S. 114 billion euros. I will update this. I update this quarterly here. This comes from the Kiel Institute. Presuming about 5 billion more in aid actually dispersed to Ukraine this quarter from Europe. I haven't presumed any from the U.S. because it hasn't seemed like that. We'll see. We'll see how this updates, but it's going to be something like this. So 270,000 euros worth of aid per casualty. That's what it costs Ukraine to stop the Russian invaders. 273,000 euros in aid. Costs them a little bit more even because, of course, their budget is higher than the aid. As opposed to back here in 2022, it's costing them $1 million. So, again, tragedy, the way it's all been working out. But I wanted to just share an update on these numbers because, like I said, the Trump administration is really, really pushing that they can get some peace for a ceasefire and for Putin to have his May 9th celebration with at least some victory or some semblance of victory. We'll see. All right, I want to now show you something else. Talked here with Peter about how in the West, there's been a lot of lies thrown at Ukrainians saying that Zelensky is a dictator, Zelensky started the war, Zelensky has a 4% approval rating. I've shown this chart before, but I've updated it a little bit. I didn't get time to show it on Peter's show. This was the height of Zelensky's approval rating, 90% in 2021. Okay. And in February 2025, Trump called Putin, and it was only from Putin that he would have heard the term 4% approval rating for Zelensky. Okay, it was 57% in February 2020. Oops, don't read that where it says population 2021. That's a wrong caption. But the approval, 57%. Okay, and then the approval here boosted in March 2025 to nearly 70%. So we went from 57% before Trump's phone call with Putin to nearly 70% approval. All of Zelensky's opponents have even said it's dangerous to hold elections. That's just how it's been. Okay, we go chronologically here with Trump. Nothing over 50%, but that's okay. The United States is a very competitive nation. This was right after January 6th, 34%. Okay. And the approval now, as of March 2025, according to Reuters, 44%. All right. Here's another one with Russian favorability, and we can actually see an effect that MAGA has, or at least the perception that Russia is the party that's pursuing peace, not Ukraine. That's what this bump is here, because back in 2002, Americans had a 66% favorability rating of Russia. Okay, this was one of the highest, actually, from Gallup. All right, and that's fallen ever since Putin has been in power. Okay, this is 2002, 66%. 2014, invades Crimea, 34%. 2022, full-scale invasion, 15%. 2023, 9%. 2024, 8%. Now, this 17%, this jump here, this came out in February. Okay, so right around the time that Trump made the phone call to Putin, all right, and Zelensky's rating jumped as well, but so did Americans' favorability of Russia. So I just think it's interesting that This is a direct effect of the Republican viewership on Ukraine. I personally don't agree with it, but we can see how powerful Trump's pull is on, Fox News to the MAGA group and everything. A populace of people who, according to the way that they booed correctly David Sachs at the Republican National Convention when he said that Biden provoked Putin to invade Ukraine, of course, all nonsense. He was booed by Republicans. There are many Republicans that I very much believe understand the threat that Russia is to freedom, to democracy, and he certainly doesn't think like a democratic liberal politician. He thinks like an autocrat that he is. So it is disheartening for me to see this bump. Okay, and I wish that Gallup would do this. These polls about Russia, they only go once a year. And this one just came out in February. So we can see this bump here. This was kind of, during the Trump transition. I think even if you did it right now, it might even be lower based on the sheer disrespect that Putin has shown Trump to his little ceasefire idea. But like I said, things are very fluid right now, changing all the time. There were no drone attacks last night. So, I'm continuing to give the benefit of the doubt to Trump to do something good for Ukraine, even if it involves a unstable 30-day ceasefire. I do think Republicans want to support a free Ukraine, but there is a narrative out there that, like it was here, when Zelensky had a 57% approval rating, somehow Zelensky is a dictator. Trump hasn't said that since then. Zelensky's approval rating is up nearly 70%. So we'll see. Maybe Gallup will do this every 6 months. I really wish they did, but as of right now, Americans' overall favorability rating of Russia has increased. I want to show this one. I did show this chart on Peter's show, but just provide a little bit more context. This is war aid, war debt, lend-lease, or reparations, all in this sort of dark turquoise color here. World War I, World War II. Okay? We have UK, France, Italy, Germany, Soviet Union. It's two big bars. One is UK. This was the all lend-lease and war debt value that the UK took from primarily the US in World War II, $31 billion. And these are, of course, dollars at the time, $1940. The UK hadn't even paid back its World War I debt, which is $4.6. In fact, they stopped making payments during the Great Depression. They'd really only made a few token payments. They didn't pay much at all. So for effect, I'm putting it as zero. If they had paid something back, it would be green. They paid a little bit, but really rounds to zero. And then they were basically bankrupt by 1940, 1941. So they needed the United States to help them fight the Nazis. And after it was all said and done, they negotiated their debt down to $3.75 billion. And it took them about 50 years, 60 years, 50 years, I guess. And they repaid it in 2000. 60 years, 2006, something like that, if I recall correctly. You can look it up. But from World War I debt of negative $4.6 billion and World War II debt of $31 billion. And when I say debt, I'm loosely using that term, okay? It was not necessarily a fixed instrument. The U.S. had this lend-lease idea, which was even to get around, actually, more stringent debt rules that the United States had at the time and foreign aid rules. This was a way of getting around it that Roosevelt did, so we could help the UK defeat the Nazis. It's a lot of debt. And so basically, $35 billion in total, World War I, World War II. The UK only had to pay $3.75 billion. And then you tack on another 3.3 billion for the Marshall Plan. Okay, it's pure investment, no aid. Pure aid, pure investment. That's what the U.S. paid to the UK after World War II. Let's look at France. 4.3 billion in debt, not repaid from World War I. World War II, much less debt actually, because France was basically overtaken the whole time. They didn't really do much. All things considered, they had some warships, they had some planes, but they didn't actually do much. In fact, Roosevelt and Churchill were worried that de Gaulle would run a tyranny, run an autocracy when he returned to power after France was liberated. They were actually worried about that, but he didn't. He did make the president of France one of the more powerful presidents in any European democracy, really, which still exists until this day, which is interesting. Also 2.3 billion in Marshall Plan aid. So that's France. Italy, same deal. 2 billion in debt after World War I, not repaid. A little bit in Lend-Lease after. This is sort of Western sanctions, right? So a little bit in Lend-Lease after the southern attack into Italy and Sicily in World War II by the Allies, but really not much. And look, 1.5 billion in Marshall Plan aid to Italy. Now we come to Germany. Germany, of course, is the interesting one, and there's a lot of talk about this. I had a chance to mention this on Peter's show, but didn't talk about it as much as I would have liked. So this is the big one, World War One. It was actually 33 billion was the number, but that was to all Central Powers, so Hungary, Bulgaria, Austria as well. But Germany, I'm putting 30 billion. I'm not sure exactly, but it's something around 30 billion in 1915 or $16 was the reparations. This is reparations now that Germany had to pay after World War I. They got around to paying 5 billion. Hitler put a stop to it immediately when the Nazis came in power in 1932. Okay, I'll come back to this, but let's just look at World War II debt. Obviously, the Nazis were the belligerents; they were the aggressors. So this is East Germany, and most of this just went to the Soviets. This is kind of in-kind numbers. It's estimated something like 3 to 4 billion was taken out of East Germany by the Soviet Union as sort of their own reparations. This went to the Soviets. So that's World War II. Okay, the U.S. had no Lend-Lease, obviously, with the Nazis, and didn't take any war debt from them. But the West did put in $1.5 billion to West Germany for the Marshall Plan. Okay, I'll come back to Germany here. Now we have the Soviet Union. 11.3 billion in Lend-Lease. Okay, so not as much as the UK. 11.3 billion, though, is a lot. Helped them stop the Nazis on the Eastern Front. The USSR didn't repay nearly anything. They didn't pay anything until the early 1970s. The U.S. negotiated this down to something like $700 million. All right, from 11 billion to 700 million. The USSR made a few token payments and then defaulted. All right, they were in Afghanistan in the 80s, so they couldn't pay. That's the Soviet Union. All right. So let's go back to Germany. Talk about this. A lot of people say that this is what made the Nazis Nazi. Okay. It turned them Nazi because they had such an egregious war debt to repay. Now, I don't deny that it was egregious, disproportional. It is. You can see it's huge. And even in the UK in World War II, all right, it got negotiated down 90%. Okay, so I don't deny that this is a huge figure. But notice all these bars, generally, what's happening? Whether you're talking about the UK, France, Italy, Germany, winners or losers of World War I, what's happening? No one is repaying their debts in World War I. No one. They just didn't pay. As well, you look at a country like Italy. Okay, Italy was the first country to turn fascist in the 1920s. Il Duce, Mussolini. What about Italy? Italy was on the winning side of World War I. They were on the winning side, had a lot of debt still, not nearly as much as Germany, but they had a lot of debt. Not as much as UK, not as much as France. Italy still themselves turned fascist. Okay, so it's not debt alone that makes a society insane and crazy and illiberal. It's not debt alone. It does play a part, I would say, in radicalizing a society, but it's not debt alone. Things are more complicated than that. But I will say, as far as making a bad situation worse, it didn't help. And if we want to compare this to Ukraine now, the mineral deal that Trump is trying to do with Ukraine, which now has gotten even worse if you've been paying attention. If you inflation adjust this, it's something like 500, 600 billion. So the $500 billion, which is going on to $1 trillion, and there's all sort of just crazy carve-outs in this latest Ukraine minerals deal. That's why economists have said this is actually worse than World War I reparations for Germany. And note, again, Germany lost in World War I. Germany did not win. Germany started the war in World War I. Ukraine did not start the war. So again, there's a lot of very weird anomalies, inconsistencies in the way that the Trump administration is choosing to deal with Ukraine. I wish that they didn't, but I'm just going to try to put historical narratives in their place and historical figures in their place best they can. Okay, this certainly didn't turn Germany Nazis, but it didn't help a bad situation. Okay, so that's where it is. And in anything, nobody repaid. All right, in any event, so you can't claim that your country is just turning Nazi because of high debt. But still, probably not a good thing for Germany in that case. So that's how I feel about the Ukraine war debt. And of course, it's a terrible narrative that, Ukrainians are Nazis. I've tried to dispel this many times, and I will continue to have to do it in the future. Here's another one I didn't get to on the show. Let's take that off. Call this orc time. When Russians occupy, Ukrainians have come up with the term in the 2022, since the 2022 invasion, calling them orcs. I think it's apropos. Let's look at a few areas in Eastern Europe. Talk about time with orcs and without orcs. Okay, so first one, Crimea, sacred place in Russia, right? Its written history goes back to about 500 BC. We got the Greeks, we got the Romans, we got the Byzantines, Ottomans, we got the Genoans, we have a Muslim Crimean Hanat population in Crimea. Very rich history without Russia. Okay, 2,311 years. So Ukraine, from 882, the Kievan Rus, which is what Russia eventually took their name from, but not from the beginning. This was the metropole of the Slavic people. Okay, so Poles, not just Ukrainians, Poles, Slovaks, Czechs, Belarusians, East and West Slavs can trace some roots to here, to Ukraine. 882, Kievan Rus. All right. We have Poland. Kingdom of Poland traces back to 960. 943 years here without orcs. Here's Lithuania. 1253. Now, Lithuania actually has a longer written history, but I'm trying to just be apples to apples here. The written history goes back at least another 250 years for Lithuania, but I'm not putting that. I'm just putting where the sort of the state of Lithuania was united. This is under King Mindaugas. Of course, Lithuania and Poland teamed up in later centuries, and this is all together without Russia. Then we have the Muscovites, 1263, just a village, 400 years after the Slavs came about in Ukraine, the metropole, eventually became the Russian Empire only in 1721. Only in 1721. Now, the German, Catherine the Great, was pretty powerful. Most powerful Tsarina, probably. After Peter the Great started the Russian Empire, she, at the end of the 18th century, helped to, in something that really has never been matched, take over all of these lands, okay? Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania, and more. Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, really as well. It's not always part of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, but at some times they were. So all of these lands, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, went under Russia control in a very short span of time, okay, in 1795. So let me just put myself up here in case you're wondering. I'm not reading from anything. This just comes from memory. Now I'm going to put up time with orc. All right, so this is all time without orcs, even including Russia. Even including Russia, the Muscovites. Of course, there was a Russian tsardom, I guess, sometime in like 1500s, but, with Ivan the Terrible. But let's just start from the Russian Empire for the Muscovites. Now we're going to put time with orc. There we go. 214 years with Crimea. This includes the last 10 years with Putin. Okay, includes the Soviet Union, includes the Russian Empire. Ukraine, same. And this is not including, of course, parts of Ukraine during any time in the last 35 years. Poland was not part of the Soviet Union, so they're a little bit less than both Ukraine and Lithuania. Lithuania was illegally occupied in the Soviet Union, so their orc time is a little bit longer than Poland. But nonetheless, you can see that of all these, let's hold off on Russia itself. On all these, it's a pretty significant minority of the time that these countries were ruled by the Russian Empire. 10% or so in the case of Crimea, a little bit more in these cases, but still vast minority of the time. And you can, of course, make Lithuania even a longer history if you want, increase the denominator. You can see why these countries might take offense to saying that somehow they belong under the Russian Empire and how they're never going to stop fighting. Ukraine, of course, first and foremost. Remember, Ukraine is the metropole, okay? Unlike in Britain going around the seas, the sun never setting on the British Empire, London was the metropole, okay? So if you were Australian, New Zealander, Kiwi, American, Canadian, your technical term was a colony if you were outside of the metropole. The metropole was London. You were a colony. This is sort of unique, twisted history of what Russia tries to do now. Okay, so I'm now counting 270 years of Russian Empire rule on top of the Muscovites, which was just a small forest town. And they did a lot. Look, they went to the Pacific here. Didn't face much resistance in this empire building, but that's what they did. And we got this sort of parallel universe where a former colony, or really it's just a group of people that turned tail after the Mongols came and went north, these Muscovites kind of claim that they have the right to the metropole. So it's more, people always try to talk about how, the West would be so upset if China wanted to set bases in Canada or something, and the U.S. would get all upset about this. None of these analogies are even remotely close to what's happening in Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is the metropole, Kiev, is being falsely accused of being part of, I'm not going to say colony because Ukraine wasn't a colonized nation, and they were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with votes eventually, even though they didn't have the name. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, this was the lands of Ukraine as well for 500 years, with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania at certain times as well. So it's a very odd situation where a sort of rogue outsider, the Muscovites, who were just a small forest, not even in existence for a few hundred years when Ukraine itself was founded, now claims historical legitimacy over the metropole. So the more apropos analogy about the Ukraine-Russian war in general, about whatever Russia is trying to do, it's like saying that America, D.C., is claiming rights over King Charles, claiming rights over the city of London. That is the analogy. of what these orcs here in Moscow are trying to do to the people of Kyiv and the Ukrainians. It's a very odd way to look at the war. But that is what Russia has been trying to tell President Trump, to which he has unfortunately believed some of this disinformation, and many other people over the last 10 years. So, orc time, I submit to you that even without full property rights and full democracies in any of these nations, they were much better off without orcs than with. And this is how long they lasted without the Russian Empire. I'm sure all of us can do just fine without the Russian Empire coming back. Okay, final one. And I mentioned this, again, as I do, I go on these tangents. And I mentioned an interesting military hero in American history. Okay, not this gentleman, but I was sort of thinking about this. So the Musk team has been going through some controversy, deleting old African American and other. We have the Japanese American, very famous regiment, by the way, the 442nd. It was a Japanese American, ferociously successful unit in World War II, was deleted. Although I guess they were put back. I haven't heard about this one, but regardless, they're doing these and they're labeling them DEI, Medal of Honors. Okay, the page is now DEI, Medal of Honor. And this is what they're trying to do to American history. Now, again, I am no lover of DEI if I think things can go overboard. And look, the most important thing is people should be happy. So whoever you are, whatever you believe, you should be happy. And I think that there are plenty of heroes that would not even think about the word DEI in the past, but they're getting mixed in with this very strange, real politique of the Trump administration. You know, they deleted images of the Enola Gay because the word gay. It's obviously a bit comical. But here's a gentleman that I brought up in my discussion with Peter. I want to tell you about him. Kazimierz Pulaski. Any Polish American should know him. I'm not Polish American, Latvian American, but any Polish American should know him. Many streets and places in Polish towns, such as Chicago, are named after this gentleman. He's known as the father of the American cavalry. All right, there's many movies about him. There's many books about him. You have to read about him. And I was making the point to Peter on the show that, again, when we talk about freedom, Americans sometimes have this idea that Ukraine should fight their own war, that Ukraine should have no help from America. And of course, as I often say, there's nothing more American than getting the French help you win your war of independence. Okay, at Yorktown, there were more French soldiers, ships, artillery, and casualties than American. Dutch debt, Spanish debt. There were African Europeans coming to America, fighting for America. And there were Poles. So back to orc time here. Right about this time, 1795, when the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, unfortunately, all three of these areas here, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, they went into dark days. And there were fits and starts. You know, there was the Duchy of Warsaw in the 1800s, and there was a lot of revolts against Russian rule. Of course, no one wants to be subjugated. But just the start of these dark days, 1795, okay, is when Poland, Lithuania ceased to exist from the map, and the German-Russian queen, Catherine the Great, the German-Russian queen, said that there's going to be no more Poland ever. Poland should be erased from the map. Well, this gentleman takes off for France, eventually meets Benjamin Franklin, I believe, takes off for France and then America. Okay, Kazimierz Pulaski. This guy's a war hero. All right, he ran a lot of fights in Poland. Okay, revolts to try to stop uh, the dismemberment of Poland, Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. He's an army of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth here. Okay, and basically became on the run because Russia had now taken over Poland, Lithuania, or was in the process of completely dismembering it. Discovered by Ben Franklin in France, and went to the U.S. to help train the militias there. Told George Washington it was, sort of a joke of an army, but actually saved Washington's life in a battle, and fought heroically in many battles and eventually died during the American Revolution. But I want to show you something interesting here. And again, I'm not a DIY lover. Everybody, a meritocracy is good. Everybody deserves to be happy. That's all I'm going to say here. They tried to find his bones and move them around the country because, of course, he died in Georgia, in Savannah, the Battle of Savannah. And they wanted to ensure that he was entombed in the correct place. And, this is a process. But over the time of finding his bones, they realized that his bones looked kind of strange. And I'm going to read this to you here. A later study funded by the Smithsonian Institution, the results of which were released in 2019, concluded from the mitochondrial DNA of his grandniece, known injuries, and physical characteristics that the skeleton was likely Pulaski's. Okay, so this is his skeleton. All right. It's DNA related. Okay, so the niece, the grandniece, has been tested. Her DNA is with these bones. The skeleton has a number of typically female features, which has led to the hypothesis that Pulaski may have been female or intersex. I recommend this documentary. A documentary based on the Smithsonian study suggests that Pulaski's hypothesized intersex condition could have been caused by congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where a fetus with female chromosomes is exposed to a high level of testosterone in utero and develops partially male genitals. This analysis was based on the skeleton's female pelvis, facial structure, and jaw angle in combination with the fact that Pulaski identified as and lived as male. Okay. Now they say there's no conclusive evidence. All right. Questions remain unsettled, of course. But it's quite interesting and an interesting hypothesis, if you ask me. And, the Trump administration, as you might have seen, is going after the Smithsonian now. We're going to start rewriting history in the name of realpolitik. I'm not a DEI fan. Meritocracy is the way, absolutely, but everybody deserves to be happy. But if you're freaking out about black people that have served or Japanese people that have served in the U.S. military, how are you going to feel about the fact that one of the American founding fathers, the father of American cavalry, is in fact Polish and maybe a female? Gonna leave it there. It's important to tell facts the way that they are. Be positive. Let's try to keep Ukraine a free country. That's all I'm trying to do. Read more books. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day hype. And I'll be back with more charts in the future. But as you know, I will never stop supporting Ukraine, and definitely read more books about heroes like this who fought incredibly bravely for the American way of life. Thank you guys for watching. Take care.